I can't stress enough the importance of having a power of attorney. Everyone that's spoken today has all been a piece in the jigsaw that we look at for our life and planning, and power of attorney is usually the first step for financial planning, and that's where I realised that there was definitely a need for aged care, because you bring into the bank a power of attorney because you're dealing with someone's affairs, someone that can't deal with their own affairs, going into care or has been in care, and that usually then triggers a few other questions that then leads into understanding that people need assistance with aged care. There are probably two words that I would use for aged care: depends and however, when giving advice, because there are so many different options. You never have one person with the same situation. They may have the same finances, but then there's different emotional needs, there's different family needs. Some want to keep the house, some don't want to keep the house, whether it's a financial or an emotional decision, and they're the sorts of things that you really need to consider before you actually go ahead and make any major decisions on any finances, such as selling the house. With the reforms, we heard this morning, Living Longer and Living Better report. Out of that came a lot of changes to how fees are charged, and home care and home care fees. So we heard that 17.5% of the age pension, which is about $3,500, would be a fee for care at home. However, if you are a part pensioner, you will pay up to an extra $5,000 a year, and if you are fully self-funded, you will pay an extra $10,000 a year. So you're talking about an extra $200 a week to get care at home if you're fully funded, or around about $100 a week. One of the, I suppose, a positive of that is, it was also mentioned that there is a cap of $60,000 that you can pay on the extra fees that you pay based on your assets and income, which is worked out. They say the average person in care is about 2.4 years. I'd love to know who these actuarials are that work out these figures, and which is $25,000 a year. That $10,000 will, if you paid $10,000 before you go into full-time care, that will then be taken into consideration in that amount. How it's actually calculated, I'm quite sure they'll get all their other money first before they cut that off at the end, but that is taken into consideration. So I suppose that is something that is a positive for you. So getting into residential aged care, and as we heard, it's different to retirement villages, but residential aged care, after you've been assessed whether you can go into care, then you have to look at how much will it cost me. So you have what's called a refundable accommodation deposit, or a RAD, which will be how you'll hear it termed quite often. You can look at that as paying, or if to make it easier, that's the lump sum you pay to get in. It used to be the bond in low care. It's one care now. You go into care depending, it doesn't matter whether it's high or low, you're going into care if you're assessed for it. So that is the lump sum that you pay. Now that will be advertised, and by law the facilities have to advertise it on My Aged Care website. There is a limit on how much they can charge. It is, I think it's up to about $500,000, and if they want to charge more than that, then they've got to give a reasonable basis on why they're charging that. Prior to this, the rules were, the bond was negotiated at the facility, and in some cases you could negotiate to pay a higher amount, which means that that's not counted for Centrelink, so you could possibly, benefit Centrelink-wise. Now the fee is the fee. So you've got payment options. You can pay that full lump sum. You can pay what's another term is a DAP, and that's a daily accommodation payment, or you can pay a combination of both. So if you have an example of, say, you have to pay $300,000 to go into care, and you decide that you don't want to sell the family home, but you have $100,000 that you can pay that, and then the difference, they will charge you, at the moment it's about 6.69 or 6.7% on what you haven't paid will be interest or a rent or the daily accommodation payment that you will have to pay. Now, I suppose the main concern with that is, do you have the cash flow? And that's another issue. You may want to keep the family home, but if you do, will the pension and any other income you've got meet your costs? So if that is an issue, you also have the option of taking that payment out of the $100,000 that you've paid. So if you wanted to organise your cash flows so that, well, I don't have the extra money to pay that, I'm just meeting my daily fee, they will take it out of that lump sum. But then the issue is, will that run out, and what do you do then? So as you can see, there are quite a few options that you have, and it all depends on what your personal preferences are and what the family options are. And, you know, in a lot of cases, mum might be going into care, but she doesn't want to sell the family home because she likes to think it'll be there. She might go back to it one day, and I hear that quite often. They won't go back to it, however, just in case you want to keep it for a while. So that will give you time to think and time to make decisions on it. When you go into care, you have 21 days to tell them how you're going to pay that amount. So no one can be discriminated against. There was always the thought that some people can get up the list if they pay more. However, now you don't have to tell them whether you're going to pay a lump sum or whether you're going to pay instalments for 21 days. So you have that option. So that's the payment to go in. So there's two parts to it. That's the lump sum payment you pay, and then you also have your ongoing fees. So you have a basic daily care fee, which everyone pays, which under the old system people were paying. It's around about $46.50 a day. Works out to about just under $17,000 a year. Then there is a means-tested fee. Now, the means-tested fee is based on both your income and your assets. And there's two things to remember. One is how your assets are assessed for Centrelink, and the other is how they're going to be assessed for aged care. So there are different assessments. So you might find paying the lump sum, $300,000, that will still be counted in your assets when they're means testing your fees. However, it won't be counted for Centrelink assessment. So that may mean that if you pay the whole lump sum, well, you might get a little bit more Centrelink as opposed to not getting it because you've still got more money in the bank. The house, the family home. Now, the family home will be counted. I think Colin mentioned it was $155,000. Someone's worked it out to be $154,179.20. So I'd love to invite that person to a dinner party with Billy Connolly. That'd be an interesting conversation. So that will be counted in your assets. So if you look at what if I don't have any money, if you don't, the government has to leave you with a certain amount of money. If your assets are under a certain amount, they can't charge you that accommodation, refundable accommodation deposit, but they will charge you an accommodation charge amount. But anyone that's a homeowner will be eligible to be means tested, therefore have to pay that lump sum because that amount puts you over the amount that the government says that you have to have. So if you're a homeowner, you will have to pay. Do you sell the family home or don't you? Very interesting discussion that we have with a lot of people around that. For Centrelink purposes, the old rules that were in place still apply as far as the family home has a 2-year exemption from being counted towards your Centrelink. However, don't forget, even though it's got an exemption for Centrelink, $155,000 of it's still counted for assessing what you pay for your aged care fees. Another way it will be exempt is if the spouse still lives in the house, or you have a protected person, someone that has some sort of a disability, or a dependent that still lives in the house and is receiving Centrelink benefits. So that will be not counted indefinitely, providing they are in it. If the spouse that's left in the house then goes into care, the 2-year exemption ceases and starts from that day that the person goes into care. So I suppose you're looking at, do you really want to sell the house? Now, another way you can keep it is if you rent it, and so you keep the house and it's rented. However, here's a however, you don't pay the full refundable accommodation deposit. You have to be paying that daily accommodation payment, or the interest on the portion you haven't paid. You can make that amount $10,000 if you want to. So you're not paying a lot of extra for that on that 6.69% interest. You're not paying a lot, but you can make it a small amount. But as long as you're paying that, you can then rent the house, and the house isn't counted. Now, it doesn't have to be commercial rental. It can be, I have one situation where they kept mum's house and the granddaughter's going to university, and she moved into the house and she's paying rent, not a large amount, but she's paying rent and she's living in the house. So it's then exempt from means testing. So your ongoing care fees, the difference between the old rules and the new rules, the old rules were you were income tested only, so it wasn't assets tested for working out aged care fees. Yes, it will increase your aged care fees, and the average we're looking at is the average person that's a homeowner that may sell the house. It's about between $3,000 and $5,000 a year extra because it's being means tested. So that is something to consider, and also to consider, well, do I want to keep the fees to a minimum? And the main things I usually see is people that want to make sure that they have enough cash flow coming in to meet the fees, and mum's money can still stay where it is. And it's not necessarily because they're protecting their inheritance. In some cases it may be. But in a lot of cases now, and we're seeing older and older people going into care, people in their 90s like to have the security of knowing that money's always going to be there. I'm not going to run out of money. Well, you could be comfortable to know that, yes, Mum, I've invested your money. Yes, your fees are being paid for. No, your money's not going down. So I suppose that's probably the main thing, and the strategies that people are looking for. Now, another thing to consider is once you've got it in place and you're comfortable with where everything is, you've then got to make sure that your circumstances don't change. You could have one person in care, one person at home. If that other person goes into care, then you've got to make sure that their fees aren't affected as well, because they both can be affected if that happens and the house is sold. A situation I had recently where the wife was at home, the husband was in care, and she became ill and with a life-threatening disease, and she only was given months to live. She then had to readjust her will, go back and see her solicitor, and that's something that's very important because she needed to change ownership on property. She needed to change her reversionary beneficiary on a pension to a binding nomination so her daughter would inherit. Now, this was a simple family situation where she could give it straight to her daughter. There was only one child. Because had she have kept things the way they were, her husband would have inherited everything and his aged care fees would have gone up $10,000 a year. So there are things that you need to consider and continually review to make sure that you have everything in place. So, should you sell the house? Depends. You don't have to sell the house. There are options. But it's a very personal thing and it's a very emotional thing, and that's why you need to seek advice in this area as well. So you've got your solicitor, Centrelink, and I can honestly say Centrelink are wonderful. If we get a situation where there's a question I haven't come across before, they have an email, I email them and they're back to me within 24 hours. So I make sure that that's all part of the jigsaw when we put it all together. So I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.